Looking to supercharge your metabolism effortlessly? Meet Java Burn. This game-changing supplement boosts fat burning with its natural blend of ingredients like green tea extract and L-theanine. Simply add it to your morning coffee for a tasteless, instant upgrade. Feel the difference in energy and well-being. Try it risk-free today and kickstart your weight loss journey. Don't miss out. Click the link below. Java Burn, your secret weapon for a healthier you.
The summer I turned 15, Grandma decided she was sick of the Bayside beaches around Annapolis, wanted a change of scenery. So she rented a seaside cottage for me and my cousins, all the way down the Cape in Massachusetts. We stayed a month. That's 30 days of lobster rolls, boogie boarding, and basking in the shade of the dunes. It was almost perfect. The only bad thing about this summer was the guy who lived next door. He was in his 60s, burly, with mean eyes. Every night when the sun went down, he'd sit on his porch and glare at anyone who passed. He made us all nervous, except for Grandma. She'd wave hello even if he didn't wave back. She made him food, too. Pies, lasagnas, that kind of thing. When I asked why, she said it was the neighborly thing to do. Communities are a delicate ecosystem. There's only balance when everyone respects each other and does their part. Till she learned what her part was. She'd cook. I went back to the Cape a few summers ago with my kids, rented the same cottage and everything. The inspiration for this trip was nostalgia. It was my first summer without Grandma, and I was searching for a little piece of her to get me through it. We arrived at dusk. The place had barely changed, like a time capsule that'd been just sitting there, waiting for my return. It was still cute, still had a gorgeous view of the ocean, and it still had a figure sitting on the porch next door. The same guy. His flinty eyes met mine as I unloaded the car. I had a tight feeling in my chest, but I remembered what Grandma said about being neighborly, so I ignored my gut and went to say hello. As I approached, my chest got even tighter, because this guy looked exactly the same. I mean exactly. Hadn't aged a day, even though more than a few decades had gone by. His steely gaze looked me up and down. Then, like he could read my mind, he said, "Things might look the same, but they've changed since you were here last." He remembered me, which should have been impossible. I was 15 when I was here. The unusual things were adding up, and when I asked him to explain, I found out unusual wasn't the right word to use. Not for what had really happened on this little slice of Cape Cod. A better word would be twisted. You're listening to Run Fool. I'm Rodney Barnes, and this is episode 33, The Night Folk, Part 1. My neighbor told me about a nearby town. Doesn't have a name. It's not on a map. For the sake of our story, let's refer to it as Nowhere. Nowhere wasn't always a mysterious place. It used to be your quintessential Cape Cod hamlet. A sweet coastal village. The ideal place to live. Or at the very least, spend your summers. I think you know what I'm about to say. This place wasn't actually as kumbaya as it seemed. It was deeply divided between the wealthy residents or summer tourists who enjoyed the town during the day and the blue-collar workers who took care of things at night. Neither group appreciated the other. Most of the night folk worked at a leather factory in town, which only operated dusk to dawn. Don't ask, that's just the way it was. The leather of Nowhere was a big industry, world-renowned in fact. It brought a lot of cash into the town. But the factory wasn't cute. It was this massive industrial eyesore. Nothing like the rest of quaint, sweet Nowhere. So in the summer of 1990, some of the town's rich residents lobbied to get rid of it. They won, too. The town passed an ordinance. The factory would be demolished by the end of the season. That, my friends, was where this story really began. A local journalist named Rachel was covering this factory closure. Although she'd consider the term journalist a bit generous, to her, small-town paper equaled small-town stories. There wasn't much actual reporting needed to cover the news of nowhere. Rachel took a drag of her cigarette as she glared at the factory. The sun was going down behind its gray rooftop. A seagull cried somewhere in the ocean beyond. A lot of people would kill to live here, but Rachel would kill to get out. Rach grew up in nowhere, and she'd always wanted to leave. Even as a kid, she dreamt of becoming some big-shot reporter, which she did. Graduated from Columbia, went on to write important stories for a massive news outlet. Then, she messed up. She lied in an article, misquoted a source on purpose. Her career collapsed after that. So she'd come home, to the only place she could get a job, Nowhere's local paper. That was 5 years ago. Since then, Rachel's days had been full of mundane fluff pieces and plenty of resentment. Rachel stubbed out her cigarette and took a breath. She was there to interview the factory's foreman for her story. The sooner she got started, sooner she could go home. Before she could make a move, a small door on the side of the factory flew open. Speak of the devil, the foreman himself emerged, pushing a wheelbarrow. He was a weathered older guy with bags under his eyes, hollowed-out cheeks. Even so, he was imposing, timber for limbs, with a big old crescent moon tattoo on his left forearm. But she wasn't so focused on his arm, because the contents of his wheelbarrow were a lot more interesting. Death. There was a pile of carcasses, pieces of skin-flayed cows. Strangely, the bodies looked flattened, dried out almost, like their entrails and organs were sucked out of them. Rachel felt her stomach heave, her heart beat loud in her ears, loud enough that she almost didn't hear the foreman ask what she wanted. Her mouth kind of hung open, useless and tongue-tied. She was thinking about the cows. Why were they flat like that? His tone got sharp when he asked again, "Why are you here?" Before she could answer, she heard voices behind her. The foreman heard them too. His gaze turned stormy when he saw who it was, the mayor and the first selectman. You need to know one thing about these two. They were town puppets. They basically did whatever their wealthiest residents asked. And what they'd apparently been asked to do was make sure the foreman was closing down the factory, like he'd been told to. It got kind of heated. The mayor and selectmen wanted the factory empty by tomorrow. The town's annual Night Under the Stars festival was at the end of the week. All the residents and tons of summer people would be there. This fest had it all. Nowhere's famous fried dough. A magician show that could blow your mind. Carnival rides. You get it. A good time. And the mayor was telling the foreman that the factory needed to be demoed by then. So, it was time to pack it up. The night was thickening around them, and the darker it got, the more imposing the foreman seemed, like he drew strength from the shadows. So it felt pretty ominous when he muttered, "We'll disappear, but we won't leave." A long silence descended, full of something. Tension, warning, a lot of unsettling things that should have been a red flag for all involved. That's when Rachel decided she'd come back later that week, when the demo started. She didn't care to get involved in Nowhere's town drama. As she went to leave, she caught eyes with the foreman. His were shockingly dark, she noticed, like inkwells. It made her shiver. This uneasiness stayed with Rachel for most of her walk home. It wasn't until she reached the coastal road outside of town that she finally relaxed. The sea air kissed her cheeks, her lips. She could taste the salt. This walk was one of the few things she liked about Nowhere. Except, it seemed noisy tonight. The ocean breeze was always loud, but this, it sounded like voices arguing, all at once, talking over one another. Rachel quickened her pace, relieved when she heard the wind quiet down. But then, her heart skipped. She saw something in the shadows of the roadside. There were figures in the darkness, about a dozen. They all stood in a line along the coast, looking towards town, like sentinels of the night, waiting for nothing good. Rachel stopped breathing, filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. Who were these folks? There were no streetlights on the stretch. She could only see silhouettes, ominous, haunting silhouettes. Then the figures gathered together and walked down the road, away from Rachel and away from the town of nowhere. Soon, they were gone, swallowed by the night. Rachel finally exhaled. Her pulse slowed, but only a bit. She stood there replaying what she just witnessed, until she convinced herself she'd imagined it. She laughed and shook her head. Wow, she was so desperate for something interesting to happen in this town that her mind was creating oddities in the darkness. Even so, Rachel walked home faster than she ever had before. When she stepped inside her house, the sound of machines greeted her. The salty air smell was replaced by iodine and alcohol. Her mom was in a cot in the living room, sleeping, surrounded by medical equipment. Right, I hadn't mentioned that yet. Rachel's mom had cancer, the kind that kills you, which was horrible. It was also why her dead career wasn't the only thing keeping her in nowhere. Her dying mom was too. Rachel hovered outside the living room. All thoughts of her strange evening faded, because when she saw her mom, all she could think about was how unfair it was. Rachel loved her, but if it hadn't been for the cancer, her return to nowhere would have been temporary. Now, she was stuck, at least until her mom didn't need her anymore. Rachel felt guilty for thinking all that, but there it was. A hand suddenly grabbed her shoulder. Rachel whipped around. It was Anna, her mom's night nurse. Rachel popped in and out during the day to administer her mom's meds, but Anna did the evenings so Rachel could get some sleep. Anna was a little meek but sweet. She was a nowhere local, same as Rachel, but Anna grew up on the other side of town, where most of the factory folks lived. Her dad still worked there, although he wouldn't for long, Rachel supposed. Anna and Rachel exchanged hellos, but not much more than that. Rachel didn't usually linger to chat with Anna. They didn't have much in common. So Rachel went upstairs to end her day, just as Anna was starting hers. The next morning, Rachel woke early, before the sunrise. She gave her mom some medicine, then left for work. Before long, she was walking on that coastal road that led to town. She was almost there when she noticed something. At the last bend before Main Street, a figure. This person was tall and standing very still. As Rachel got closer, she realized they weren't standing. They were hanging from the branches of an oak tree. And the reason they weren't moving was because they were dead.
Looking to supercharge your metabolism effortlessly? Meet JavaBurn. This game-changing supplement boosts fat burning with its natural blend of ingredients like green tea extract and L-theanine. Simply add it to your morning coffee for a tasteless, instant upgrade. Feel the difference in energy and well-being. Try it risk-free today and kickstart your weight loss journey. Don't miss out. Click the link below. JavaBurn, your secret weapon for a healthier you.
Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. It was a man. He dangled in the air, held there by his hands, which were wrapped around a branch above him. Flies buzzed around his head, and what a head it was. It was massive and leaking. Blood dripped out of every orifice, which sort of made sense when you considered his body didn't seem to have any in it. It was as thin as a piece of paper, like every ounce of this man's guts had been sucked through the holes in his face. It was a monstrous thing to stand in front of, so Rachel almost didn't notice the sign around his neck. Written in blood, it said, "The night is finished." Rachel gasped, because of the sign, sure, and the rancid smell of rot that came off the body. But mostly, that gasp was because she'd recognized this poor soul. Last time she saw him, he was alive and giving grief to the factory's foreman. It was the town selectman. Less than 10 minutes later, Rachel sat on the curb, giving her statement to a policeman. She knew him, actually. You know, small towns and all that. They'd gone to school together. Chris Franklin. Rachel remembered him as a dud, one of those guys who seemed destined to hang around nowhere for the rest of his life. Here he was, giving her the third degree. What time did she see the selectman? Where was she before that? Could anyone attest to her whereabouts? Rachel kept her answers short. She was too wrapped up in watching the coroner haul the body down from the tree. There was a pool of blood by the trunk. One of Chris's questions brought her back to earth. Had she seen the mayor? Because he was missing. She stared at Chris. That got her attention. Because, yeah, she'd seen the mayor. He was with the selectman just last night. She should tell him so. But the wheels were kind of churning for Rachel here. Remember when she imagined that crowd of people last night in an effort to find something interesting about this place? Well, the selectman's bizarre corpse actually was interesting. So was the mayor's disappearance. That's right. For the first time since coming home, Rachel could actually feel a story brewing. A small-town conspiracy. Something she could write about. Maybe publish. And use to get her career back on track. But Rachel was getting ahead of herself. First, she had to figure out if there was actually anything there. She couldn't let some doofus like Chris get in her way before she even started. So for the second time in her career, she lied. No, she hadn't seen the mayor. When the cops were done with her, she took off. She hurried through town square. There were already banners and signs hanging up, promoting the Night Under the Stars Fest. Rachel ignored those. Ignored the newspaper offices, too. Work could wait. Soon, she stood outside the factory once again. She didn't know what she was doing, exactly. All she knew was that everything going on seemed to start with this place. Here were the pieces she had. The factory was closing. The foreman and his workers were pissed. And the two men leading the charge were missing or dead. But there was no sign of life at the factory. It was dark. A padlock on its front door. Seemed like the foreman had closed up shop after all. Rachel looked around but didn't see much. No workers, no foreman, no mayor, and no way to get inside the place. So she sat for a while, staring up at the roof. The sky seemed to go gray around it, making the place seem both lonely and formidable. Rachel decided she needed to talk to someone who really knew this town, understood its dynamics and history. Someone who'd lived there a long, long time. Her mom. When she got home, her mom was asleep, or at least Rachel thought she was. When she plopped down on the couch, she heard her name. Her mom's eyes were cracked open. She offered Rachel a tired smile, which was nice. There weren't a lot of smiles these days, and it wasn't until she saw it that Rachel realized she needed a smile like that. She felt herself relax, just a bit. But this sweet moment wasn't enough to derail her objective. Her mom wasn't usually lucid, so she had to take advantage. She moved closer and asked about the factory. Her mom told her what she already knew. The factory had operated in harmony with the other residents for generations. But over the last decade, that changed. This town had started to see the workers as less than, maybe because they worked at night. An after-hours crowd is always considered unsavory, and the factory closing was just one example of this town showing them disrespect. It'd been going on for a while. Not letting them onto certain beaches, shooing them away from businesses, labeling them a rough crowd. Criminals even. Rachel nodded along, but what did it have to do with the selectman and the missing mayor? She asked her mom, and when she mentioned the sign around the selectman's neck, her mother's face went sallow. Then she croaked out a warning. The night folk are done with us. Rachel's mama did her best to elaborate. She really did. But she was scared, and it took a lot of energy to be scared, especially for someone who was weak to begin with. So a lot of what she said came out broken and frantic. I'll just tell you the gist of it. Everyone knew about the drama over the factory shutting down. But most didn't know about the lore that surrounded the place. And the real reason we should respect those who work there, it's because those people weren't people at all. They were ageless, ancient beings who feasted on the guts and blood of whatever living thing they wanted, be it animal or human. Some cultures call them vampires, but that's not exactly what these things were. People call them the night folk, because the night gives them strength. They are part of the darkness, and if you aren't careful, the darkness can swallow you right up. Rachel's mom collapsed back on her pillow, exhausted. Her eyelids fluttered. Her hands went slack. She was asleep once again. Rachel went still, listening to the rhythmic churning of the machines, absorbing what she was just told. She didn't know how much was true, but even if it was all legend, something was going on here. Something sinister and raw, which was awesome, because that meant there was a killer story, and Rachel was just getting started. But a week later, Rachel hadn't uncovered much of anything. No new leads. 5 days had passed, and all she had were some broken theories, and the legend her mom told her. Not that she hadn't tried. She'd spoken to the mayor's family, the selectmen's too, but they were as stumped as she was. She couldn't talk to the foreman because all the factory workers had vanished. She'd even gone to the other side of town, where they lived, but it was all deserted. It wasn't just the factory workers. All the town's night owls had flown the coop. No nightly security guards, no graveyard EMTs, no drug dealers even. And worst of all, Anna, the night nurse, stopped coming to take care of her mom. The night workers had abandoned Nowhere, just like Nowhere had abandoned them. The other residents didn't seem to care, though. They were wrapped up in the mystery of the selectman's death and the disappearance of the mayor. And they were pretty busy with the Night Under the Stars festival, which had finally arrived. Rachel sat on a bench in town as the day dwindled, watching volunteers set up for the event. She should be at the newspaper office working on her story about the factory, but the demo had gotten delayed, so she'd used that as an excuse to avoid her deadline and investigate the mayor and selectmen, which, like I said, wasn't going well. So Rachel had taken the afternoon off to sit and feel bad for herself. The moment of quiet was giving her a chance to take in the town, its quaint shops and tree-lined sidewalks. The ocean sparkled just beyond the tops of the houses. It was one of those moments where she had to admit, Nowhere was beautiful. Then a figure caught her attention. They moved slowly across the square, acting dodgy, like they didn't want to be noticed. But Rachel recognized the person's bulky frame. The foreman hadn't vanished. He was smack in the middle of Nowhere. The foreman's gait seemed a little slow, lethargic even, but the more she stared at him and the lower the sun got in the sky, the more spry he became. Rachel rose and followed at a distance. She was so focused on the back of his head she didn't notice the sun had set, and she didn't realize where they were going, not until they arrived at the factory. The foreman disappeared around the side of the building. When Rachel got to the corner, he was gone, but it was obvious where he went. A side door was ajar. When Rachel reached it, she hesitated. It was incredibly dark inside, a dense, complete blackness, the kind that can make you feel panicky. But Rachel's curiosity was stronger than her fear, a sentiment I can identify with. So she took a deep breath and stepped inside. Her arms waved around her, trying to feel her way. Her fingertips touched the cool metal wall of the corridor. Her palm pressed against it, and she let it guide her forward, on, deeper into the abyss. A loud clang made her freeze. A squeal followed, just a rat. Then, Rachel heard something else. It sounded like wind. The kind of noisy breeze she'd heard on the roadside. Maybe it wasn't wind, though. There was no flowing air to speak of, just the noise, and it was coming from up ahead. She followed it, step by step. As she moved, a very bad smell reached her, like rotting meat. A foul, acrid odor. Then, the pitch blackness began to lift. It occurred to her that there may be some kind of light source nearby. She was right. Before long, she saw a light ahead, bursting around the edges of a half-open door. She reached it and peered through the crack. She was looking at the factory floor, a big, open space with conveyor belts and hulking machines, all the kind of stuff you need to make leather en masse. The room was full of people, dozens. Rachel recognized some of them. The security guard from the movie theater, the adult film store's owner, a few graveyard shift police officers. These were people she knew, who she'd known her whole life, although she hadn't really given them much thought before this. The foreman stood on one of the machines above the group. A figure was hauled out of the crowd and thrown at his feet. It was the mayor. He'd been beaten. His suit was torn. He trembled violently as he looked up at the foreman and spoke. Rachel couldn't hear, but by the way his lips moved, she guessed he said, "Please." The foreman didn't reply. Instead, he opened his mouth. That's when Rachel realized she hadn't found a story. She'd uncovered a nightmare. The foreman's jaw unhinged. His lips pursed and expanded, forming a gaping hole. A hole that grew wider. A thick, wet tongue thrashed inside, licking the lips around it. Then, the foreman latched onto the mayor's face. The mayor flailed, trying to shove the foreman away, but the horrific mouth was locked on, immovable. A slurping sound ripped through the factory. The foreman's cheeks billowed as he sucked the mayor's life straight out of his face. Want to know what happened next? You'll have to wait for the next episode of Run, Fool. Run, Fool is a production of Ballen Studios, Campside Media, and At Will Media. It is hosted and executive produced by me, Rodney Barnes. This episode was written by Kate Murdoch and produced by Abakar Adan and Lee Mengistu. Editing by Abakar Adan. Sound director, designer, and mixer is Kevin Seaman, and artwork by Jessica Clogston-Kiner. Production support by Jeremy Bone and Cole Lacasio. Special thanks to our operations team, Doug Slaywin, Ashley Warren, Sabina Mara, and Destiny Dingle. Executive producers at Ballen Studios are MrBallen, Nick Witters, and Zach Levy. Executive producers at Will Media are Will Malnati and Rosie Gammon. Executive producers at Campside Media are Matt Scher, Josh Dean, Vanessa Gregoriadis, and Adam Hoff. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.